have the authority to review this, and that the state attorneys were able to bring this case to court. And they said that the administration failed to show that the order met a constitutional requirement. They also said that the government didn't even present evidence that the nationals from these states had perpetrated any attacks, or that failing to put this travel ban back in place would cause any injury. So just point by point, the Ninth Circuit going through saying that the Department of Justice lawyers did not make their case at all.
This is a 3-judge panel, so the administration could technically come back and say, I want to go en banc. I want to have the entire, what is it, I guess the 9th. They want them to review the whole thing.
Yeah, they could do that within 2 weeks. They could try and take it to the Supreme Court for an appeal, but they have a tough time there. I mean, 5 justices would be needed to overturn this Ninth Circuit decision, and Supreme Court's only at 8 justices right now, so that would be pretty difficult. They could just say, forget the timing question, because that's what we're talking about here. It's the issue of whether or not to reinstate the travel ban, which has now been on hold for a week. They could just say, forget that, moving on, let's just get to the merits of it. Let's talk about the president's authority to do an executive order like this, because that's really the key question. It's on hold right now while the courts consider that.
And that's my other question, too, about the president now and the power that he has. What do you think this will change the way that he will go about doing things moving forward?
Well, the president's public comments would not suggest that. He said in that tweet last night, see you in court. A small group of reporters actually ran into the president last night in the West Wing, and he said that he believes the administration is going to win this one. He said, we're going to win this easily, but when you look at the bullet points from last night, that's not really the case. The other thing that's interesting, 2 points I'll make, that the court also said, now without getting into the merits of the authority that the president has, the court said last night that his comments on the campaign trail, his tweets, talking about a Muslim ban, they could all be used now as evidence of discrimination when a court does consider whether or not the president has the authority to do this. So that's an interesting, the whole anything you say or do could be used against you in a court. The court saying that the president's comments, not just the words in the executive order, that's what the administration was arguing, just the words on paper. They're saying, nope, everything else.
This is Karen Travers with ABC. How much do you think there's a learning curve going on here with a man who's the president of the United States of America, who is a businessman, versus somebody who's been a politician? And as a result, there's a big difference between the two.
Yeah, I mean, the comment from the president last night in that tweet certainly sound like a developer who wants to fight the courts, fight a case in court about regulation, or when he's told he can't get a permit or something like that. There's certainly more of a political process here in Washington. And the fact that when you print out the bullet point of all of the legal arguments and everything was a win for the state attorneys is pretty remarkable, in terms of how strong the Department of Justice case was. The other thing that was interesting in this is that the government was claiming in its oral argument the other night, earlier this week, that the courts couldn't review the president's authority when it came to stopping immigration because of a national security claim. And the court just flat out rejected that last night, saying that there is no precedent to claim this unreviewability, that's anti the entire structure of our constitutional democracy. Nobody's ever tried to argue or won that a court, the Supreme Court or any court, can't review the president's actions. I mean, that's separation of powers and checks and balances.
Karen, I want to ask you something else. Another thing has been making the news the past couple of days regarding the ban, and one of the district judge who also blocked the ban, and how the Supreme Court nominee Neil Gorsuch, used the disheartening and demoralizing allegedly regarding to what Trump said about the so-called judge. Now it sounds like the White House is kind of spinning it in a way that they're saying, well, he wasn't referring to President Trump. So what's going on with that?
So here's where it stood. a senator came out and said that Neil Gorsuch said that the president's comments were demoralizing and disheartening. A spokesman for Judge Gorsuch confirmed to ABC News that, yes, he said those words referring to the president's recent comments. Then another person on Team Gorsuch said, well, he was really just talking in general about attacks on the judiciary, and that's what the White House is saying, that it wasn't specifically about President Trump's comments, it was just he says any attacks on the judiciary are demoralizing and disheartening. Well, of course, that leads to many questions at the White House briefing yesterday of, but that's what the president did, so doesn't that apply to what the president said? And the White House press secretary certainly dancing around that and spinning everyone in circles.
Sounds to me like this is all going to end up in the Supreme Court of the United States to figure this out.
Yeah, it certainly could. If not this question of whether or not to reinstate the travel ban, the White House just might say, forget that. Let's stop arguing about this being on hold or putting it back in place. Let's just get right to the merits of the case, because that's ultimately what needs to be considered.
Karen, thanks for the time this morning. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Karen Travers, ABC News correspondent, joining us here on the Big